And another transition.
Something went wrong.
Something.
Your computer's trusted module has malfunctioned.
I was digging something out of the basement just before I came.
Back to audience again.
I'm gonna see if I can make this one work.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to call this Friday, August the 25th, special council meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we're holding this on the traditional lands of the Klamath Nation. And we're going to start with the adoption of the agenda. All right, moved and seconded. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Item number 2, letter received July 31st from Art Lloyd, Vice President of Logger Sports, regarding complaint against admin staff and request for support. Everybody had a chance to look at the letter? Yes. Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I know. I've had electronic problems and I don't know what we're doing at the moment. So on my agenda, item number, governance and meetings.
Here comes the letter.
Are you on the, oh, there's the agenda.
Item 2.1 on the open agenda.
Updated.
I could just pause till I can get electronic work so I can see where the rest of us are, would really help me. I guess I could go off but the paper one doesn't have any attached. One doesn't work, which is where I started. And,
Could we approve adoption of the letter and then move to 3, which will have the reports that hopefully Jessica has brought to life? Oh,
attempting to help me.
Just a 2-minute recess to.
Good now. Thank you so much, Mayor.
I'll second the motion to receive for information.
What is going on? Oh, here, yeah.
you need your ears. We have a seconder from Councillor Doubt. Mr. Jackson, what is the etiquette? Can we have a vote in the absence of Councillor Palm? Or
Certainly, Your Worship. Yep, you can. And if he wishes to reconsider later, he can raise that.
Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Before we vote, could I speak?
Absolutely.
Now that I have my stuff. Thank you, Your Worship. Apologies for all of the delays. The information I wouldn't mind having is, did we ever get back with a response to the gentleman's email that he says he did not receive a response to? Have we communicated appropriately in response to Mr. Lloyd's concerns? Aren't we on the Logger Sport correspondence? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, I can wait till then.
Okay, all in favor of the motion? Passed unanimously. We'll move to reports for information 3.1, background to Logger Sports request. Is staff going to discuss this, or we'll just go from the information provided?
Your worship, it's an information only report, so there was no presentation. Really, it's for you to.
Great. Does any on council wish to speak to any of the information provided? Councillor Doubt.
Yeah, I've read both the letter and the report from staff, and the staff report, for those who don't have it to hand, goes through all of the discussions between the Logger Sports organization and various city staff about the grant applications and how all the timing and the information systems try to work together. And, you know, I think it's unfortunate that there wasn't enough time in this process and enough information provided to get a grant for Logger Sports, because I think everybody appreciates the event. But I think we can do more as a city for communication and for simplification, really, of our grant procedure. And I think council should look into that, but I would like to suggest perhaps we simply share this report that's in the package as 3.1 with the Logger Sports people, so they can totally understand what happened.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I received Art's letter back when he sent it to the city. He's a friend from way back, and we chatted. And I feel the information provided attached to 3.1 really does outline what should have happened, and it very diplomatically outlines what didn't happen, actually. So I appreciate that. I appreciate Councillor Doubt's point. You know, hopefully we can always help people more. And maybe that is also a role for us at this table here. I find myself doing it very often, is helping people figure out how to do things that relate to city processes. So if Art's still involved in this next year or the year after, I think it's a bi-yearly thing. I'm confident that it will be sorted out and we'll get an application in a more timely fashion. And I think Art would be very satisfied with this. He's a pretty reasonable guy, even though, you know, it's a logger and he tends to be, you know, at times. Anyway, so it feels good to me what was presented here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Worship.
Good. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just wanted everyone to know that I'm super supportive of the Logger Sports. I think it's an amazing event. I'm hoping that we can do a much better job in the future of making sure all of our event organizers understand where all the avenues for grants are and deadlines and so forth. The Arts Council does handle some of our grant requests on our behalf, in particular to support events in the arts arena. And since the Logger Sports has an arts component to it, would have also probably been eligible for grant requests through the Art Council. And so I think some simple information around folks holding events and the applicable grants and how the city supports them and what the deadlines are and how those work and who's eligible as a piece of information that we give out to everybody anytime they inquire would be super helpful. And I'm thinking we have that probably, and we do that. And I'm open to talking to members of the community who need help with that at any time. And I hope we can avoid this kind of confusion in the future. Thank you.
I'd just like to add compliments to the staff for what I thought was an excellent response. There's no further
Mr. Lloyd did make a positive comment in regard to our park staff and the preparations for that event on site. And I made sure that our park staff was well aware of that scenario. So
excellent. Thank you, Councillor Palm. We'll move now to item 4. It's reports for decision. The first one is the Qathet Regional District request for growing community funds. Our Chief Financial Officer.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So I'm presenting an analysis and obtaining direction regarding a request to allocate additional city funds to the QRD Resource Recovery Center project. So I'll give quick background. As everyone knows, the city received $4.2 million in a growing community fund grant from the province, and the QRD also received a grant from the province as well under this provincial program. And the QRD has written a letter to council requesting that the city consider allocating additional funds from our community forest grant or our growing community grant to the Resource Recovery Center project. And so just for background, we will contribute to the project at the percentage allocated to us by the RD, and this is done based on the city's assessed value as a percent of the total RD, and many are aware of, and that for this current year was 53.01%. So currently, if we say no, we still contribute to the Resource Recovery Center at 53.01% of the costs. So how do we assess if this is a good decision financially for the city? Well, simply put, to allocate funds to a shared project, additional funds to a shared project will never beat the financial gain from assigning the funds to our own purposes. So is there a question for later? Okay. And so, but it is good to demonstrate this. It's good to put that principle into theory. I mean, and an example could be if you owned a house and then you owned a rental property with a friend and there was a mortgage on both properties and you won the lottery and your friend goes, let's put it towards our shared rental. You'd probably think I'll save half of my interest, but I think I'll probably put it towards the house that I own. So that's sort of the analogy is we will not find a scenario where we won't be financially better off when we apply it to our own projects. So that's the simple financial analysis. But to put numbers to it, we could think through a scenario where we put that $851,000 towards the Resource Recovery Center. That could be money that we're not putting towards the final loan draw for the treatment plant. So then we have to ask ourselves, if we do that, how much principal and interest will we pay over 30 years for these two projects? And if we contribute additional funds to the RD, it's about 27 million. And if we don't, it's 26 million. So that variance is roughly $1 million that the city is better off to reply no to contributing additional funds, but definitely absolutely contributing in the method of the annual tax requisition that we receive. I probably won't go into too much detail, but I have in the report for anybody who likes the detail, the actual interest and principal costs, as I know there's lots of viewers and different parties interested in this analysis. As well, I often get questions on my assumptions when I do financial analysis, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but just pointing out that the interest rate assumption, which often gets a lot of questions, is 4.71%, and that was MFA's 30-year lending rate at the time of this report. It's now 4.98%, but I would like to assure everyone that that does not change the recommendation. I have not, I've done undiscounted cash flows. I haven't discounted the cash flows to present value to keep it simple. Doesn't change the recommendation. And I've also assumed that though the city might not benefit from the growing community fund from the regional district on this project, should they choose not to put it to this project, I've assumed that it'll be applied to a project that the city would benefit from. And that assumption has to be stated because otherwise the analysis would change quite drastically. So in summary, the financial recommendation is that the city is better off to craft a letter declining the request. I'll open it to questions.
Okay, I say thank you for the report. I find it very clear. There's a lot of facts and figures in there. When you go through it, I think it's a really clear factual basis to make a decision on this request from the regional district. I want to point out a couple of things. I'm going to do it over and over again throughout my term to try to explain to people how taxation works between the regional district and the city. If you reside in the city of Powell River, you pay taxes to a number of different governing bodies. School District 47, the regional district, and the city of Powell River are just three. There's more of them. The regional district taxes on the assessments of properties, and they have a regional service that is participated in by all of the residents of the regional district, and that is a regional waste resources or waste recovery system, which is the landfill or the resource recovery center that's being built. So about 53% of that joint project of the regional district is paid for by taxpayers who are residents of the city. Outside of that, the residents of the city also pay taxes to the city of Powell River, which is where the grant goes that we're talking about here and we're deciding what to do with. So if we use that $4-some million for a city project of some kind, be it a fire hall, be it a wastewater treatment plant or highway paving, all of that comes out of what taxpayers in the city would have to pay for otherwise. If we transfer that money, that grant money, and use it for a regional district project, you've outlined very clearly that the taxation benefit and the debt reduction payment benefit goes largely to the residents outside of the city in the regional district. And while it's worthwhile for the regional district to ask, I knew they were going to do it, and nobody on the regional district board will be surprised at what I'm saying, because I've said it before. It's not a good deal for the city taxpayers. The city taxpayers needs access to that grant money.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Worship. Really appreciate the excellent explanation, and also Councillor Dotes, who I chatted with very briefly after Chair Brander suggested this idea to me when we were having lunch or something together, and I had a funny feeling, need to look into this because there's something that doesn't quite jive for me, so Councillor Dote saved me the time of figuring it out myself, but it isn't really that complicated. It's really pretty simple. But I really want to say I appreciate the spirit that Chair Brander initiated this in. He truly is seeking to benefit not just the regional taxpayers outside of the city, but everyone. And I think maybe the numbers weren't quite as clear to him when he initiated this, but they clearly don't make it a fair deal for the city. So thank you very much.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. The issue did come forward at the QRD. Both Director Doubt and myself weighed in at the time. I actually made most of these points without the numbers because I didn't have them figured out to the accuracy that you do. But X times 0.53 is never ever going to be more than X times 1. So it's just, that's the math essentially. And so I indicated that I highly doubted that this would be approved by City Council or supported simply because the math doesn't support it. And that was my rationale at the time. And so thank you so much for doing that math and putting real numbers to my intuitive explanation. Appreciate it.
We have a recommended motion. We have the motion and then Councillor Palm.
So
kind of in shock here at the moment, seeing the initial figures that were flashed up on the screen and our portion of the cost. So those figures of 27 or 26, you are saying are our portion of the cost of that build-up?
Through the chair, it's a combination of the TV there. It's a combination of our final treatment plant loan and the portion of the Resource Recovery Center, and it's over 30 years. And it's the principal and interest. So the chart on the screen shows that top portion. If we say no, we'll pay 14.5 million in principal and interest on the resource recovery. And then on our final draw for the treatment plant, we'll pay 11.8 million in principal and interest. And again, just to be clear, it's the final draw because the theory was, what would we do with it? And we've already done a number of draws on the loan. So they're big numbers, and why I wanted to make it clear in the presentation that it's over 30 years.
So I want to just say thank you for the clarity of what the rising interest rate does for those final costs. But I have to ask, and we're in an open session right now, and the public's never seen these numbers before, I don't believe. So what is the initial base number that we are working from to arrive at those figures at the moment?
Through the chair, I won't speak to the Resource Recovery Center project because it's not one that I oversee as part of my job. So I can't speak to that, but I do know that it's being covered in QRD's financial plan to some degree. So there might be some reports available, and if not, maybe a question to one of the other councillors on that.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Doubt.
I'll move the motion that the city decline the QRD request to contribute additional funds to the Resource Recovery Center project.
Seconded by Councillor Almeida. Councillor Isaacson.
Yeah, just a short comment now that we got the motion on the floor. I don't want to reiterate what other councillors have mentioned. I do appreciate the thinking behind it to support the financial cost to regional residents. And also I know that the city has a lot of big things ahead in a number of regions and areas, and having the flexibility of this growing community funds is really important. And I don't think this is the best use of that funding.
We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item 4.2, 2024 to 2028 financial plan and the 2024 property tax timeline.
Thank you. I'll be presenting the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. I'll call it the budget from here on in, if that's okay. And the 2024 property tax timeline. And I'm looking for direction on this timeline to ensure that this is council's budget, and that as we proceed, we're proceeding with mind of how council would like to execute the budget this year. For background, the community charter does require the city to adopt a 5-year financial plan bylaw annually before May 15th, and that must occur before the annual property tax rate bylaw. These bylaws can be amended at any time, and until the 2024 financial plan bylaw is adopted, the 2023 financial plan is in effect. So that's the background on what we're doing and why we're here. So the first step in the budget process is to establish a timeline. And it's, at the end of August is a great time to have this open discussion of what do we want the coming months to look like. And so based on how the prior year budget went and some feedback I've received, I've taken a first stab at a tax timeline, and it's up on the screen there. And just to summarize it, it starts in August, so kicking off right now, and it would end on May 2nd. And there's 3 main phases to the budget process. So the first one is in green, it's August to October, and this is what I would call the council direction and community engagement phase. And here is where we put up front the request from council to staff, understanding the strategic priorities, engaging the public and understanding their requests and their ideas. So that's the green phase, and I'll go item by item at the end. The blue phase in the middle, that's November, December, and that's where we get the financial plan drafts in front. So that's where we can put something on the floor. November 2nd, we'll have the directors present their budgets, and then council would give feedback, and then I would have about a month to turn around draft 2. So I'd hope, yeah, middle of December, we have a fully almost vetted budget. And then the final phase is January to May, and that's the orange phase there. And that's where we start bringing the bylaws in front of council for consideration and adoption. It's also when we receive the BC assessment property tax roll, so we can start looking at assessment changes and tax rates. So that's that third phase. So those are the 3 phases. And specifically, I would like to just highlight a couple items in here. In the green section, I do have September as the online engagement using Balancing Act. I know we used to put it a little bit more in December, but we're finding December people are kind of distracted with Christmas shopping. And we also think if we do it in September, it gives us more time to consider the feedback. So that was the idea behind that. As well, there's a September 28th in-person engagement from 4 to 6. It would be similar to the budget open house we did in March, which I think was well attended, received a lot of good feedback. And but I recall some of the feedback being, can we do this earlier in the process so we can incorporate it rather than educate on what the budget is. So I have tentatively put that on that date. It was a finance committee, so I thought people's calendars might not already be otherwise occupied. But please give me specific feedback on that, as we would need to get the ball rolling booking facilities. I'll also point out that in October, we'll be talking about utility rates. And so, of course, our utility rates drive a big portion of our budget, but we don't have to wait until November and December to talk about them. So the water bylaw is, the rates have been established for 2024. And as I check them, they look quite close to levying the costs required to operate water. And, but with sewer, we're looking at some changes to our debt costs, of course, and the sewer parcel taxes are meant to levy the costs of the interest costs on debt. And they're meant to levy enough money for principal and transferring to the reserve for future capital costs. That's what the parcel taxes are for. And given that we're at a point in the project where we have a good understanding of what our costs will be, I'd like to bring those forward to get a fresh look at where our parcel tax is sufficient, or do they need to change, as well as the sewer utility rates. Currently the taxes subsidize sewer operating a little bit, and that's not wrong. It's wrong if it's the other way. We can't take a fee and cover taxes. So it's not wrong, but we will be doing kind of a deep dive into sewer to understand what council's desire is for the parcel taxes and the utility rates. So a little teaser there, but that drives a big portion of the budget, and it's good to do that as early as possible. As I go through, I don't think I'll go line by line by any means, but I will conclude with my recommendation that the financial plan timeline is approved, and open the floor to questions and open to any feedback for changes. Thank you.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you very much for putting this together. I'll focus on questions right now rather than feedback. One is, in the report, it said September 14th for the in-person engagement. And so I just want to make sure.
You did change that. Thank you. I missed updating the report. The attachment is correct.
So my second question is related to I know previous councils, my understanding is in August, you get some direction from council about assumptions, like budget assumptions. And I don't think you've asked for that today from us. So particularly related to assumptions regarding service levels and whether those would be maintained, or we're looking at cuts or protection of certain areas. Are you looking for that direction today, or where would that fit into the process?
Through the chair, I think given some uncertainties, we'll have to discuss that a little bit later in our process. Okay. Generally, we would be coming in August asking for indication of service levels maintaining or not maintaining, and we will get to that point in the process a little bit further on, as we see some uncertain matters resolved.
So I would suspect, for example, that the in-person engagement might give us some insight on what we would direct staff to do, given our understanding of what the public might be interested in and other factors that might influence our recommendation. Okay.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, I felt it a little bit unfair to say right up front, council, what do you want? And then to prepare a budget based on that without giving you that engagement period, as well as many things that will be discovered more in September and October. So a little bit different than in the past.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Mayor.
Councillor Doubt.
Yeah, I guess my two main questions were actually the same as Councillor Isaacson's last question. And I'll rephrase it a little differently. If we're going to have online balancing act for the citizens to give input into the budgetary process, I think it's going to be more difficult for them to give valid input when they don't have an idea or guidance from council about what council thinks may be the direction to go on service levels and may be the direction to go on a percentage tax increase target. I think knowing those would provide valuable information for citizens trying to participate on the online. So I know there are uncertainties today in what we might have going forward. And I think actually the longer we have planning for the uncertainties, the better off we're going to be. So I'd like to push for some more certainty on dates about when those things are going to take place. For example, the service levels and the target tax rates have to be somewhat firm for the directors to provide meaningful information when they come before council to talk about how much they want to spend in their different budgets. So is there any hope of getting any more clarity on those dates?
Through the chair, I guess two questions there. So the one about the online engagement, and that's a good point. There's pros and cons to when that gets executed. The Balancing Act will use the 2023 budget, and we ask residents to dial up or dial down in each department. And so whether we do it in September or December, we do have the proper data for it, because we're not asking them to set 2024 necessarily, just to say, reflecting on 2023, what changes do you want? But like you said, there's still some pros and cons depending on what time. And then is the second question when we'll find out dates to have more certainty on some unresolved matters? Or was the second question, is it more efficient to, on the outset right now, establish the service levels so directors can then go back and prepare the budget for November 2nd with a little bit more to work with? And I would say if council felt comfortable doing that, that would be preferred. However, if council did not feel comfortable doing that, whether you're finishing up strategic planning or don't feel you have enough information, we could make it work otherwise. So it is the preferred method, but of course it's the will of council. It's your budget, and I want the process to reflect that. So
if I can, I would just say my preferred target would be to have as much information as we can possibly provide to the electors about where council would like to go, so that when they come and present, we can get closer to a final presentation from the directors than we might, because I can see if we try to decrease spending over a period of time after we've already heard from the directors, it could just be a more lengthy and more time-consuming process. So I'm hoping we can get with it as soon as possible.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. Super happy to see that early engagement put into the schedule. I would be most comfortable having some early engagement, particularly designed to talk about service levels and getting a feel from what the public wants to tell us about service levels. And then once we learn that, that could inform decisions around our assumptions for the budget. So I really appreciate that opportunity. I am curious about the Balancing Act and it being overly simplistic for us to get valid input around service levels, and whether there's any changes to how we present that or the information that the public sees as far as focusing more on services that are a little more discretionary than rather than those that are fairly set in stone.
Through the chair, we have looked at other engagement tools and have come up a bit short on something that might work for the financial plan. We did find a tool called Prioritize, which allows a municipality to put a survey out there and have members of the public prioritize services. And so you could get collective data on generally where they rank their priorities, but in connecting with the service provider, and I bounced the idea off them using it for budget. They said it's too broad and that you would need to use that tool for, say, transportation. And then in which case you'd have the Zunga bus and you'd have all these different categories underneath that exact service. So that was a little bit shut down, though I understand where you're coming from on trying to make the tool as useful as possible. And just at this point in time, we weren't able to find anything that would be able to handle the big data that we have with the financial plan, but certainly keeping in mind that when specific services are being considered, we can try this prioritized tool and drill down to more detail there on a service level.
Is there a way to pull the things that we don't have discretion on, like we need to pay our debt and it has to be this much? We are required to put reserves away at this rate in order to manage the assets that we have. Many of those things are not things we can change. If currently the Balancing Act lets people do whatever they want, whether we can do it or not. And that's the part that's a little bit concerning. So protective services, for example, there's a place we can't go down, right? Because we have to provide those protective services, and this is what they cost, and we don't have discretion on those. So I was wondering if we could make it a little more realistic as far as some don't go down, period, and the only ones you have that can move are the ones that move.
Through the chair, yeah, I could look into that and see. I would require.
You could put them up, but not down.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if we can do that, but I will ask and see if the software can do that. That's a great idea.
Because I want to give the public a real chance to provide input that's possible for us to respond to.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. Don't know if I can properly ask this question without just putting more on your plate and the plate of the directors, but in some ways you have yourself to blame because you've done a good job so far this year of always giving us a worst case and best case scenario for many situations. I don't think I'm prepared to discuss service levels right now, but there's been many things I've mentioned in previous council meetings that are on my mind about some services that I feel, we'll call them fringe in terms of they benefit the masses, but a reduction in some of them probably wouldn't affect many people as well. And I'm wondering if it's possible for staff to almost prepare two sets of plans where one would be like service as status quo, and one would be like if we were to find 2% of things to cut, just to take a number out of the air, knowing that we have certain expenses that are going to go up regardless. What could we trim to be creative? Because then council actually has something to look at versus picking a few things in advance before we actually know what the numbers. And I'll take just as a small example, we have organics collection for a very small percentage of our community. That's been a long-term pilot project. I don't know what that costs on a yearly basis, but we're not expanding the program to the rest of the community. So that could be something that I could see. We remove collection and have it just go to a central spot, and that would be a small savings that has impact. But then it might only be like it's costing everyone 50 cents a year, and it doesn't really make a big impact in the end. So without knowing it, I'm just throwing darts basically. So I'm just wondering if that makes sense.
Yeah, through the chair, that's great. And that approach is being taken in past years as well. So to reiterate, what if we came on November 2nd with our base budget? This is no change to what we're doing. This is base. We're continuing on. And then each director presented one slide that had some ideas of areas they could cut and the impact in total dollars as well as on the average single family dwelling. That puts it into perspective. And I think then from draft 1 to draft 2, we have something to work with of Do we want to pick out any of those ideas and embed them in draft 2 or not? Is that, and that would be, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Thank you. Councillor Palm.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate all the fine work that you've done on this front already, Denison. I have to say that I think I heard Councillor Doubt say he would like to hold off on getting input from the public later on until there's a lot of the unanswered questions that are out there that we can get answers for, so that they're well informed when they're helping us out, and we're well informed and have some kind of game plan in place. I agree with that approach. And I will say this for the new councillors at this table. In my opinion, the city is this year, next year in our financial budget, entering uncharted territory. We have never entered a year where we have put service cuts ahead of everything else that we've been doing in the city. So we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place at this time, with all the outstanding questions on the financial figures to be answered. As I say, I would like to hold off until more information is far more clear and we can plot our path forward. Thank you.
Councillor Doubt.
I want to be real clear about what I was getting at. In previous years, council has set a target for service levels and a target range of tax increases quite early. In August or sometimes early September, we've done that. I would like to see that done as soon as possible to inform the Online Balancing Act. So if the citizens are going to participate in a program of letting us know what they would like for the budget, I think they can do that way better if they have council's general parameters set before they start consulting. And what I have heard said many times is that people want to have more opportunity to consult about the budgeting process. And the later we leave decisions in the process, the less time there is to do that consulting and the less time there is to listen and to react to what people have to say. So I would like to see the Online Balancing Act and the public consultation go ahead as soon as possible. But to me, it makes way more sense to have some general parameters set. If members of council want to see reductions in services, then the earlier council says that, if that's what council wants to do, the easier it's going to be to try to fit in those changes. That was my point. I wasn't talking, and I really don't want to see things put off until later, because it will mean, I think, we have a very, very busy December, January, and February if we do that.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. So getting into thoughts about the Balancing Act. So when I think about your recommendations, I think what information when is useful for me to be able to make good decisions. And I agree with Councillor Doubt, early engagement is important. And I feel like this is a bit of a chicken and egg. Things can be done in either direction and neither is perfect. And so what I see as important is, some fulsome engagement early on. And I think in the past we've relied on public attendance or letters related to the budget, just as a course of usual procedure in our public meetings. And I think there could be ways to increase the amount of public input we get as we go along the process through, press releases on encouraging people to write to council or letting people know more about meetings. Because I think while people can attend meetings and can read the agendas, it's not really accessible for a lot of members of the public to keep up on that things. And there's a couple of fantastic eagle eyes that do keep up on those things, but the vast majority of residents don't. So I kind of want to see a both and situation. And when it comes to the Balancing Act in particular, I'm kind of in line with Councillor Elliott in the sense that what is important information for me, and I think we talked about this the last time we looked at Balancing Act input, is some of the comments where the richest data is, because whether somebody feels like more money should be going to developmental services is is not really meaningful. And so I'm most interested in the service. Well, one, I think a lot of residents don't know the extent of the services that the city provides. And I would like to know which of those are important, which of those would people really urge us to protect, which of those people are willing to be more flexible with if times were tough, where there could be possibilities for cuts. And so if the Balancing Act as a tool is not able to break that down at the service level, can we be explicit in the written questions to elicit some of that information? Because I understand there's limitations of the tool, but can we get explicit about, yeah, what do people want to protect at all costs? What's so important and fundamental to their quality of life versus where people are a little bit flexible? And along those lines, this analysis will be tougher, maybe not possible, but if there are certain services that are crucially important to a specific portion of the population, like if they're crucially important to seniors or to youth or people with mobility issues, that's also information that I am curious about. I might need to intuit that myself given the limitations, but from an equity standpoint, understanding when we cut, who are we impacting? When we add services, who are we impacting? These are some of the things that are helpful for me when I get input from the public. So don't really question, but any responses or any ideas based on that discussion?
Yeah, through the chair, those are great ideas. I will look into if we can be more explicit in our questions for the written. And I have noticed over the years that the most valuable data is the comments, and we do get a decent amount of them. So to direct those comments in the most efficient way to find out answer the questions that you have, that would be great. So I'll look into that as well as setting limits. I will say the budget must balance. So when they cut, they have to add somewhere, or when they add something, they have to cut somewhere else. So that might be what they tell me is your limit. You have to find another spot to take it from. But at the same time, I will ask those two questions. And if we come up short on there, I'll ask if there's any other tools, because munis are always doing different things to engage. And I just see there's now a municipal apps are a thing. So I thought, oh man, that could be cool one day to have that for engagement. But anyway, I digress. There's many ways to do it, and we'll keep kind of looking for the best way that suits council.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you. I appreciate this discussion, and I appreciate your new approach, or at least the changes, and openness to your flexibility in how we approach it. And I agree with a lot of what's been said. So I only really have one question, and that is, how expensive is consultation like through the Balancing Act? And is it possible that we could do 2 stages of it, which we haven't done in the past? Is that so that we, perhaps we can't, I would love it if we could do what Councillor Dowd suggests, but if we can't, can we extend the opportunity for the public to engage with what we do have on an early, and then bring them in at subsequently when we do have more information, or when we are more informed? Yeah, same thing. Is that conceivable?
Through the chair, I think it could be the best of both worlds, considering the unique position we're in this year, in that we could do the online engagement in September as planned, but then January 1st, we get our assessment role from BC Assessment, and that is the point that we have sufficient data to understand the tax implications of the budget we set. And so I could add in this calendar as a potential running Balancing Act in January. We can do an explanation of why. We've received new data. We're late in the budget process. We'd like to hear from you again, given this new information, and really understand the public feedback on that. Now, if the rule comes out and there's very minimal changes, then it might not be something we need to do. But if the rule comes out and it's drastically one way or the other, we would want to have flexibility to go back to the public. And I believe with the schedule we have, it gives us that flexibility to commit January to that. So that is possible, and I could slot it in as potential additional engagement if council would see that fit.
If I may, just a quick specific question. How much extra work is that likely to give staff and expense?
Yeah, thank you for asking. The expense is pretty minimal. I can't see it more being than $1,000. And the time is very minimal as well because it's just using the 2023 budget. So once that's already in there, it would just be republishing it, sorry. So to do it again is actually quite minimal. And then the data comes in pretty streamlined and we're able to put that into a report. So thanks for asking, and it would be pretty minimal.
We have a recommendation from staff. Do we have a motion? Councillor Elliott.
I would make the recommended motion with changes based on discussion.
Seconder, Councillor Almeida.
I'll just have one more thing to say.
I'm sorry?
Before we vote, I wanted to
Councillor
speak.
Elliott.
Thank you so much. So I like I'm in favor of the motion. And I also wanted to let you know, Ms. Denniston, our CFO, that I have a ton of confidence in the processes that you're putting forward. I really appreciate the flexibility and changes that you've made to our process based on what you've heard so far. I feel like you're really listening, and I really appreciate it, and thank you
So much.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious, I did like your idea that you had addressed about coming with kind of a two-option plan for November 2nd. I didn't see any head nods from council, so I don't know if that was part of our recommended changes or that was something anyone was in disagreement with in terms of how we're addressing service levels.
Councillor Doubt.
If anybody wants to answer that question, I'd like to speak myself after.
Councillor Elliott.
I thought it was well received by our CFO. And she seemed willing to put it in the process, and I added onto the motion the tweaking of that based on our conversation. And so I had assumed that it could be part of what she would put forward as a process.
Councillor Doubt.
Yeah, so my comment was that going forward, I would like to see this published after this meeting so the public knows the dates when we were going to be talking about these things. Because even the eagle-eyed members of the public that follow what used to be our finance committee and our council meetings couldn't possibly have known less than 48 hours ago what we were going to be talking about today. And if people know what's on our agenda and they know what our schedule is, they may have an opportunity to come and fill the seats of the council chamber and tell us what they think. So I think it's extremely important that it be published.
Okay. Councillor Isaacson.
A minor thing, I am not available on September 28th. I booked some of my private client work that night. That being, I could probably attend the first 15 minutes, but I could also encourage people, emailing me directly as an alternative. But if it works for the rest of people, I don't want to get into a scheduling by committee in the middle of things situation, but I just wanted to say that I already know I won't be able to attend.
Okay. We have a Councillor Palm.
Just want to add to the comments and to the chair, and that is that I agree with Councillor Southcott. His point is well taken, that try to work into engagements into this process, because I think it's vitally important. We seem to have gotten off track communicating with the public to a great extent with our new format and not knowing exactly when our meetings are coming up, and I'm always second guessing. So we need to come up with a patented schedule here that the public knows when we're meeting and what we're discussing well ahead of time, because right now, without anybody in the gallery today, I can tell it's not working. And we need to work on that, because this process is going to need a great deal of public consultation, especially after we get the unanswered questions coming forward.
Thank you. We have a motion. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item number 5, Councillor Almeida.
I recommend that following the adjournment of this special meeting, council move into a closed meeting to discuss matters covered by the community charter under section 90.1 C, labor relations or other employee relations. E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. J, information that is prohibited or information that if it were presented in a document would be prohibited from disclosure under Section 21 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages and that, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And N, the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
By Councillor Isaacson. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Item 6 is questions. We have Mr. Galinsky. Do you have any questions? Okay. Do we have anybody online with a question? No? Do we have anybody in the audience with a question? All right. Do we have a motion? Okay, seconded.
Seconded.
Seconded. All in favor? Passed unanimously.